This really sounds like just opening up any sort of complicated. This is like me opening up the bonnet of a car and just starting to pull out wires and unplug things to see at what point the engine stops working, at which point I'll walk away and probably pay someone to come and fix it. Um, the thing that leaped out at me there was the mention of Timaru. Um, my dad had a procedure at Timaru Hospital reasonably recently that didn't go well. And I know from experience there that his first point of contact was he was told that, hey, look, our chief medical officer is looking into this to see what is going wrong. Timaru is a place that very heavily voted for national. And I think that they will regret this because it is very clear that Timaru Hospital will not be a priority, no matter who they voted for. And now, if something goes wrong at Timaru Hospital, they're going to have to rely on what I assume is an overloaded chief medical officer from either Christchurch or Dunedin. If it's Dunedin, he's probably jammed in a janitor's closet breathing in asbestos while he's trying to read out what's going wrong up there. It's like it's just a cascade effect at this point. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, I would say that that concern is shared by anyone in a regional hospital. We have in Northland so-called doctorless hospitals that aren't staffed with doctors, that can't find nurses for some of the wards and units, and occasionally or frequently in some cases have to close down either wards or complete emergency intakes. I mean, I'm sure you've been following the Dargaville story for months now, and the Bay of Islands story and the Kaitaia Hospital story. So it's nothing new, but yeah, and so in all of this, there's a big concern that we're seeing the reality of understaffing and underfunding in the public health sector, and yet we're being told repeatedly that we're over budget, that our budget is bloated, that it needs to be cut by a couple $1 billion, that we're overstaffed with nurses, which is the most wild thing. I don't know if you caught an interview with the health commissioner, Lester Levy, being given a simple yes or no question of, are the chief medical officer's frontline staff, and is it true what you say that we are overstaffed by 3,000 nurses? And he couldn't answer either of those questions honestly. It was a very simple yes or no. Are we overstaffed or are we not? And he found about a half dozen ways to say we're 3,000 nurses over budget, but he could not be pressed to admit that we have grave understaffing issues with nurses. And I think if you can't even be honest about like what is black or what is white, that everything from there on down cascades. And so, yeah, there is concern among clinicians and patients, rural hospitals, city hospitals, that the rhetoric doesn't match up with the reality of what we're facing. And I mean, in that same conversation, I think there was a little subtle switch that I don't know if you caught this, but he went from saying there will be no cuts to frontline services to, quote, there will be no cuts to overall frontline expenditure. And it sounds like the same thing to most normal people. But if you parse that very carefully, it's consistent with other things they've said, which is, the highest funding ever, but they never address inflation, that the funding envelopes and expenditures do not address inflation. And more importantly, they don't address population growth. Yeah. So you've got this amazing Alice in Wonderland situation where one person is saying, we're spending more than ever. And the other is saying, you haven't controlled for inflation and you haven't accounted for population growth. And so come on, you can't, that's disingenuous, isn't it? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me, but that's the reality that we're operating in now.